Richard Thompson's fingers drummed against the polished mahogany conference table in his Manhattan office, his eyes fixed on the vibrating phone. Mount Sinai Hospital, again, the fourth call this morning. With a quick swipe, he declined it, returning his attention to the billion-dollar merger documents scattered before him. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, rain pelted the glass, matching the steady throb of the headache building behind his eyes. Mr. Thompson, his assistant, Linda, appeared at the door. "The board is waiting in the main conference room. Mr. Jenkins says they can't delay any longer." Richard nodded, gathering his papers. At 55, he'd built Thompson Enterprises into a Wall Street powerhouse. Today's merger would cement his legacy. He couldn't afford distractions, especially not mysterious hospital calls. The elevator ride to the parking garage gave him a moment to loosen his tie. Spring. Despite the spring rain, Manhattan's streets were buzzing with their usual frenetic energy. His Bentley purred to life, the familiar leather seats cradling him as he pulled into the wet streets. That's when his carefully constructed world shattered him. He almost missed the red light on Madison Avenue. The Bentley's brakes screamed against the wet asphalt as he slammed them, and in that moment of chaos, he saw her. There, huddled in the entrance of St. Patrick's Church, was Sarah, his wife. The same Sarah who had vanished without a trace 10 years ago. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. She looked so different, thin, worn, her once elegant clothes replaced by layers of weathered garments. But those eyes. He'd know those eyes anywhere. And then he saw the girl. Maybe 9 or 10 years old, wrapped in a ratty blanket, drawing on a piece of cardboard propped against her knees. The same blue eyes as his own stared back at him through the rain. The honking of impatient cars behind him snapped him back to reality. His fingers fumbled with the seatbelt clasp as he tried to get out, but by the time he managed to open the door, they were gone, disappeared into the crowd of umbrellas and rushing New Yorkers. For the first time in 20 years, Richard Thompson canceled a board meeting. His sister Catherine, the company's vice president, took over immediately, her heels clicking rapidly across the marble floor as she rushed to his office. "Richard, what's wrong?" she asked, concern not quite masking the ambition in her voice. "The board is furious. Jenkins is threatening to pull out of the merger." "I saw her, Katie. I saw Sarah." The color drained from Catherine's face. Her manicured fingers gripped the back of his leather chair. "That's impossible." Stressed. "She's been gone for 10 years. You're just stressed about the merger." But Richard was already on the phone. "Get me Jack Morrison from security, now." He turned to the rain-streaked windows, his voice hard. "I need our best investigators. Money is no object." "Richard, be reasonable," Catherine pleaded. "Even if it was Sarah. It's been 10 years. People change. Move on. The company needs you focused right now." But Richard wasn't listening. His world had stopped spinning on its axis. Decades of carefully constructed control crumbling like the corporate empire he'd built on the ruins of his marriage. The image of that little girl's eyes haunted him. Those impossible, familiar blue eyes. "Cancel all my meetings for the week," he ordered Linda over the intercom, "and get me everything we have on Sarah's disappearance. Every file, every report, every detail." Catherine stood silently by the door, watching her brother with an unreadable expression. Outside, the rain continued to fall on Madison Avenue, washing away the last traces of where Sarah and the mysterious girl had stood. But Richard knew everything was about to change. Catherine's heels echoed against the marble floor as she left his office, her posture rigid with tension. Richard barely noticed. His mind was racing through a decade of questions, each more painful than the last. Why did Sarah leave? Where had she been? And that girl, him. He pulled out his wallet, hands shaking slightly, and removed a worn photograph. Sarah on their wedding day, those striking blue eyes shining with joy. The same eyes he'd just seen in that little girl's face. The timing couldn't be coincidence. "Sir?" Linda's voice came through the intercom. His traumas. "Mr. Morrison from security is here." Jack Morrison entered, his weathered face serious. 20 years of handling Thompson Enterprises' most sensitive matters had earned him Richard's complete trust. "I need everything you've got, Jack. Every contact, every favor owed, every kilter. I want eyes on every shelter, every soup kitchen, every church within 10 miles of St. Patrick's." "Of course, sir. But," Morrison hesitated, "sell them. If she's been hiding for 10 years, she might have her reasons." Richard's fist crashed against his desk. "She had my child, Jack. My daughter." 10 years. 10 years I never knew. His voice broke on the last word. "I'll have teams on the ground within the hour," Morrison assured him. "But sir, discretion might be our best approach. If she spots our people—"
"She'll run again," Richard finished, the thought sending a chill through him.
"Set up a command center in my penthouse. I want updates every hour."
As Morrison left, Richard turned back to the rain-soaked windows. Below, Madison Avenue continued its relentless pace, oblivious to how one man's world had just imploded. Somewhere out there, his wife and daughter were struggling to survive on these merciless streets while he sat in his tower of glass and steel. The phone on his desk buzzed again. Mount Sinai Hospital. This time, Richard picked up. "Mr. Thompson? This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Psychiatric Services. We've been trying to reach you about some old records that might interest you." Richard's hand tightened on the receiver. After 10 years of silence, suddenly the past was screaming from every direction. In his pocket, his personal phone chimed with a text from Catherine. "Board meeting rescheduled." "But Richard, please, be careful. Some doors are better left closed." Looking down at the rain-slicked streets where he'd seen Sarah, Richard knew there was no turning back. His client ace. He'd let her slip away once before, too blinded by ambition to see what mattered. He wouldn't make that mistake again, even if it cost him everything. The old music room in Richard's Upper East Side mansion hadn't been opened in years. Dust covered the grand piano, Sarah's piano, like a gray shroud. The evening light filtered through heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the Persian rug where they used to sit together. Sarah playing while Richard unwound from long days at the office. "Start here," he instructed Morrison's team. "Every drawer, every cabinet. I want to know everything." The investigators moved methodically through the room, their gloved hands carefully examining each potential piece of evidence. Richard stood by the window, watching the city lights emerge as dusk settled over Manhattan. His mind kept returning to those eyes, Sarah's eyes, in that little girl's face. "Sir," one of the investigators called, "we found something." A leather-bound book emerged from a hidden compartment in Sarah's piano bench. Her diary. Richard's hands trembled as he opened it, recognizing her elegant handwriting immediately. The last entries dated back 10 years. April 15th. "The darkness is getting worse. The doctors say it's depression, but it feels deeper than that, like drowning in slow motion." Richard's barely home anymore. When he is, he's distracted, always on his phone. Paphos. How do I tell him about the baby when he won't even look at me? April 20th. Called his office again. "Linda says he's in meetings all day. She sounds worried about me." Myself is. Maybe she can tell from my voice how scared I am. "The doctor at Mount Sinai says I need to check myself in. Says it's for the baby's safety. But I need Richard to know first. I should. Need him to understand." April 23rd. Catherine came to see me today. She found out about the baby. Said she'll help me tell Richard, but her eyes were strange. Cold. She keeps talking about the company going public, about timing and image. As if that matters now. As if anything matters except this growing darkness. The entries stopped there. Basics time. Richard remembered that week, the biggest deal of his career. Every call had seemed like an interruption. Every conversation with Sarah a distraction from his empire building. "There's more, sir," the investigator said quietly, holding out a stack of papers found with the diary. Hospital documents. Psychiatric ward admission forms. Now. And there, at the bottom of each one, Catherine's signature. "Richard?" His sister's voice came from the doorway. She must have followed him home. "What are you doing in here?" Pitsparature. "This room's been closed for—" Her voice trailed off as she saw the papers in his hands. The color drained from her face. "You knew?" Richard's voice cracked with fury and disbelief. "All this time, you knew where she was?" Catherine's corporate mask slipped, revealing something like fear underneath. "I was protecting the company. Protecting you. She was unstable, Richard. Pregnant and unstable." Pregnant. The word fell like a stone between them. "My wife was pregnant, having a breakdown. And you, what, buried her away?" "The company was about to go public." Catherine's composure cracked. "A mentally ill wife? A pregnancy? The board would have forced you out. Everything you'd worked for would have been lost. So instead, I lost them both." Richard turned back to the diary, his voice deadly quiet. "My wife. My child. A decade of their lives. Tell me, Katie, was it worth it?" Did protecting the company's image justify destroying my family? Before Catherine could answer, Morrison appeared in the doorway. Sir, we found something else.
Recent surveillance photos from St. Patrick's. You need to see these. Richard looked at his sister, seeing her clearly for the first time in years. We're not done here, Catherine. Not by a long shot. The photos would reveal more secrets, but the biggest betrayal was standing right in front of him, wearing his family name and a Chanel suit that suddenly looked like armor. Mount Sinai Hospital's psychiatric ward looked exactly the same as it had 10 years ago. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the sterile corridors as Richard followed Dr. Sarah Chen through the maze of departments. His footsteps echoed against the linoleum floors, each step bringing him closer to answers he wasn't sure he was ready to face. We keep records for 15 years, Dr. Chen explained, unlocking a storage room. When we tried reaching you, it was because we're digitizing old files. We found something concerning. She pulled out a thick folder labeled Sarah Thompson. Inside were dozens of call logs, medical reports, and unopened letters. Richard's hands trembled as he picked up the first envelope, postmarked 10 years ago.
Dear Richard, I'm having our baby.
The doctors say my depression is severe, but all I can think about is telling you about our child. Please come. I need you more than ever. The darkness is getting worse, and I'm so scared. They want to keep me here. Say it's for the baby's safety. Catherine promises she's telling you everything, but I haven't heard from you. Why aren't you coming? Don't you care anymore? Sarah. Dr. Chen watched as Richard sank into a chair. There are dozens more, all marked as collected by Catherine Thompson, but never delivered. Back in his office, Catherine finally broke. Tears streaked her designer makeup as she confessed. She was getting worse, Richard. The doctor said she might hurt herself or the baby. I had to make decisions.
Decisions? Richard's voice was deadly quiet. Like hiding her letters?
Like keeping my child from me for 10 years?
The company was everything to you. You were about to close the Morgan merger when Sarah started talking about hearing things, about feeling watched. I knew the board would use it against you, so I protected you. Protected me? Richard slammed his fist on the desk. You destroyed my family! I didn't know she'd run away. Catherine's voice cracked. When she escaped the hospital, I thought it was better if you never knew. You were finally achieving everything you'd worked for. But there was more. Sarah had been cleverer than anyone realized. God. Even in her darkest moments, she'd managed one last act of protection for their child. She transferred her shares, Catherine admitted, pulling out old legal documents. 5% of the company, put in a trust. For the baby. I couldn't touch it without exposing everything. Richard stared at the documents, then at his sister. 2 decades of trust shattered like glass. Get out, he whispered. Get out of my office. Get out of my company. Richard, please. I said get out. As Catherine fled, Richard turned to the window. Below, Madison Avenue teemed with life, oblivious to the storm raging in his heart. Somewhere out there, his wife and daughter were surviving on these streets, while he'd sat in his tower of wealth, blind to their existence. His phone buzzed. Morrison. Sir, we've located them. St. Patrick's runs a soup kitchen. They're there every Wednesday morning. Tomorrow was Wednesday. Richard looked at Sarah's letter again, his vision blurring. 10 years of mornings they might have shared. 10 years of his daughter's life, gone forever. But tomorrow he'd have a chance to make it right, even if it cost him everything he'd built. Morrison pulled up surveillance photos on Richard's laptop. Vericalized. We've been tracking their routine. They stay at different churches, never the same place 2 nights in a row. But Sarah's smart. She keeps Emily in school. Emily? Emily. The name hit Richard like a physical blow. Your daughter. She's enrolled at PS 41 under the name Emily Warren. Straight A student, gifted in art and music. Morrison paused. She has a piano scholarship, sir. Plays every morning before classes start. Richard closed his eyes, remembering Sarah at their piano. The talent had passed down, another precious gift he'd never known about. There's something else, Morrison added hesitantly. We found medical records. Emily has a heart condition. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but she needs care they can't afford. The injustice of it all threatened to overwhelm him. His daughter, his own flesh and blood, struggling with a medical condition while he sat on billions. One more thing, sir. Morrison's voice was careful. Grabbed his daughter. Catherine's been making small deposits to a shelter account. Monthly payments. Starting right after Sarah disappeared. She didn't just know where they were. She was monitoring them. Richard's world tilted on its axis.
Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. But as he stared at Emily's school photo, those hauntingly familiar blue eyes, Sarah's gentle smile, he wondered if any amount of money or power could make up for 10 lost years. Dawn painted the Manhattan skyline in soft pinks and golds as Richard parked his Bentley a block from St. Patrick's Church. His hands gripped the steering wheel, sweat beading despite the morning chill. In the back seat, a small gift bag held a silver music box, a peace offering he'd spent hours choosing, though now it felt woefully inadequate. The soup kitchen line was already forming, desperate faces huddled against the spring cold.
Richard scanned each one, his heart racing.
Then, he heard it.
Piano music drifting from inside the church. Bach's Prelude in C major, played with surprising skill. Following the melody, he climbed the narrow stairs to the main chapel. Morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across worn wooden pews. At an upright piano near the altar sat Emily, her small fingers dancing across yellowed keys with natural grace. Sarah stood behind her, one hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder, looking exactly as she had that rainy day on Madison Avenue, thin, worn, but somehow still elegant in her shabby clothes. The final notes hung in the air as Emily turned and saw him. Her hands froze over the keys, blue eyes, his eyes, widening in recognition. Richard felt his breath catch. 10 years of birthdays, holidays, first days of school, all lost moments crystallized in his daughter's stunned expression. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, though her own face had gone pale. Her grip tightened on Emily's shoulder. "You can keep playing if you want," but Emily's gaze remained fixed on Richard. "Mom?" Her voice trembled with a mix of fear and curiosity. Is he?" Sarah straightened, subtly positioning herself between them, the protective stance of a mother who'd spent a decade guarding her child. "Why are you here, Richard?" I know everything, Sarah," his voice rough with emotion. "About the hospital, the letters, Catherine." He swallowed hard. "Why didn't you come to me directly? I would have helped." "You had to know I would have helped." "Helped?" Sarah's laugh was bitter, though her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I tried, Richard. For months I tried. But you were always in meetings, always too busy building your empire. Even Catherine said." "Catherine lied," Richard interrupted, taking a step forward. "She hid your letters, your calls. She knew about Emily and never told me. She kept you from me." Emily's small voice cut through the tension. "You know my name?" "Is previous." Richard's heart cracked at the wonder in her voice. He turned to his daughter, fighting back tears. "I know more than that. I know you're top of your class at PS 41. I know you have a piano scholarship. I know you love to draw, especially buildings and cityscapes. And I know," his voice broke, "I know you're my daughter, Alec." Emily's fingers traced the piano keys absently. "Mom said you were too busy for us, that you chose your company over family." "I did," Richard admitted, the truth burning his throat. "And it was the biggest mistake of my life. But Sarah, Emily, I'm here now. Please let me help make things right." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "We don't need your money, Richard. We've managed for 10 years. "I know about Emily's heart condition," he said quietly. "Cellar." The color drained from Sarah's face. "How did you—" "Please," Richard stepped forward, holding out the gift bag like a peace offering. "Not for me. For her. Let me at least make this part right." The chapel door burst open. Catherine stood there, breathless, her designer suit out of place in the humble surroundings. "Richard, stop! You don't understand." Emily jumped up, surprising everyone by placing herself between Catherine and her mother. "Aunt Katie? What are you doing here?" The world seemed to stop spinning. Richard turned slowly to his sister. "Aunt Katie?" Catherine's perfectly made-up face crumpled. "I've been watching over them, making sure they were safe, had enough to eat. I couldn't tell you, Richard. The guilt, knowing what I'd done." "You told me he didn't want us," Sarah's voice cracked. "That child. That he chose the company over his own child." "Because that's what he always did," Catherine cried, mascara tracking down her cheeks. I thought I was protecting everyone. The company, Richard's position, your dignity. I never meant for it to go this far." "You played God with our lives," Sarah whispered, pulling Emily closer. Emily looked between all three adults, then squared her small shoulders. "Mom, I want to play something. For Dad." "For Dad." The word hung in the air like a prayer. Richard staggered slightly, bracing himself against a pew in prayer. In all his dreams of this moment, he'd never imagined his daughter would call him that. Not yet, maybe not ever.
Sarah's hand trembled as she brushed tears from her eyes. "Emily, sweetheart. Please, Mom, the song I've been practicing, the one you said was his favorite." Richard knew before her fingers touched the keys. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The piece Sarah used to play for him after long days at the office, back when they were young and in love, and the future seemed full of endless possibility. The first haunting notes filled the chapel, and with them, the first fragile threads of hope began to weave their way through 10 years of silence. The peace of that morning at St. Patrick's lasted exactly 3 days. Emily was practicing at the mansion's grand piano, her small fingers picking out a melody, when she suddenly clutched her chest and collapsed on the keys. The sound of discordant notes brought Sarah running from the kitchen. "Emily!" She caught her daughter just as Richard burst through the door from his home office. "Call 911! Sarah's voice cracked with panic. "It's her heart! She needs her medication!" Richard was already on the phone, barking their address to emergency services while Sarah cradled Emily, whispering soothing words through her tears. "Stay with me, baby. Help is coming. Just breathe."
The ambulance ride to Mount Sinai was a blur of sirens and beeping monitors.
Emily's face was pale beneath the oxygen mask, her small hand gripping Sarah's tightly.
Richard sat opposite them, watching helplessly as the paramedics worked.
"She has hypertrophic cardiomyopathy," Sarah explained shakily.
"We've been managing with medication from free clinics, but lately..." She broke off, choking back a sob. In the emergency room, Dr. Chen, the same doctor who'd helped Richard find Sarah's records, took charge. "She needs immediate intervention. The condition has progressed significantly." "Whatever it costs," Richard started, but Sarah cut him off. "We can't afford. I'm her father." "But..." Richard's voice echoed through the sterile hallway. "I have billions, Sarah. Billions! And my daughter's been rationing heart medication?" Before Sarah could respond, Catherine appeared, still in her business suit. "Richard, we have a situation. The board called an emergency meeting. News of Emily's condition leaked to the press." Richard waved her off, but Catherine persisted. "They're voting on your position as CEO. Jenkins says the scandal threatens investor confidence. He's pushing for temporary removal." "Let them," Richard snarled. "My daughter." "If you lose control of the company," Catherine interrupted, "you lose the resources to help her. Jenkins will make sure of it. He's been waiting for an excuse." Sarah stood suddenly, swaying slightly. I can't do this again." Her voice was distant, unfocused. Dr. Chen grabbed her arm as she stumbled. "Classic signs of severe depression relapse," the doctor said quietly. "Sarah, when was the last time you took your medication?" "Couldn't afford both," Sarah mumbled. Emily needed hers more." Richard felt the world tilting on its axis. His wife and daughter had been slowly dying, choosing between vital medications, while he'd sat in his tower counting billions. Catherine stepped forward, her voice surprisingly gentle. "There might be a way. The trust fund I helped Sarah set up for Emily, it's grown significantly. Good. With proper legal maneuvering." "No." Sarah straightened, her eyes clearing. "You don't get to play savior now, Catherine. Not after what you did." "Mom?" Emily's weak voice came from the hospital room. "I can hear you fighting. Please don't fight." The adults fell silent, shame coloring their faces. Emily's. Dr. Chen took advantage of the moment. "Emily needs surgery. Soon. And Sarah needs psychiatric care. Those are the medical facts. How you handle the rest is up to you." And him. Richard turned to his sister. "How long can you keep the board at bay?" 48 hours, max. Jenkins is out for blood. Get our best PR team on it, or to well it. I want Emily's story controlled, sympathetic, and get me Jenkins's file, everything we have on him. No one threatens my family." "Richard," Sarah protested weakly, but he cut her off. "I lost you both once because I chose the company. I won't make that mistake again." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Thompson, there's a reporter in the lobby claiming he has evidence about your sister's involvement in your wife's disappearance. He's threatening to go live within the hour." Catherine's face went ash white. "Richard, Sir," another voice. Morrison this time. Jenkins just called an emergency board vote. They're moving against you now. In Emily's room, the heart monitor began beeping faster. Aries. 3 weeks after Emily's emergency surgery, Richard pushed open the heavy doors of his Upper East Side mansion. Sarah hesitated at the threshold. Emily's small hand clutched tightly in hers. The marble foyer gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. A world away from the church shelters they'd called home. "Your room is upstairs," Richard said softly to Emily. "I had it decorated, but we can change anything you don't like." Emily's steps echoed as she crossed the foyer, her surgical scar still healing beneath her second-hand dress. Her eyes widened at the grand staircase, the priceless paintings, the sheer opulence surrounding them. "It's like the buildings I used to draw," she whispered. Sarah's grip on her daughter's hand tightened. The mansion held too many memories, both sweet and bitter. Here was the wall where her wedding photo once hung, the living room where she'd tried countless times to tell Richard about her pregnancy, the music room where she'd played through her depression, hoping he'd notice something was wrong. "I kept everything," Richard said, watching her face. "Your clothes, your books, your sheet music. It's all still here." "Why?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Of you." Before Richard could answer, Catherine emerged from his home office, her face tight with worry. "The PR team leaked Emily's surgery story. It's gaining traction. Billionaire's lost daughter found living in poverty. The public's sympathetic, but Jenkins is still pushing for the board vote. Now." "Not now, Katie," Richard warned, but Emily had already noticed the headlines on Catherine's tablet. "Is that me?" She moved closer, reading the article. "Mom, why are there pictures of us at the shelter?" Sarah snatched the tablet, her hand shaking. Photos showed them at various soup kitchens, sleeping in church basements, Emily playing donated pianos in community centers. Their entire struggle laid bare for the world's entertainment. "I'm handling it," Catherine assured them. "We're focusing on the reconciliation angle, the medical crisis, the family reunion. If we play this right? Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Like you played things right 10 years ago?" Catherine flinched. "Sarah, please, I'm trying to help now." "Both of you, stop." Richard's voice was firm. "Emily needs rest." The doctor was clear about minimizing stress. As if on cue, Emily swayed slightly. Sarah immediately forgot her anger, supporting her daughter. "Let's find your room, sweetheart. You need to take your medication." Richard led them upstairs, past closed doors hiding a decade of guilt, to a room bathed in soft purple light. A white canopy bed took center stage, surrounded by carefully chosen art supplies, books, and in the corner, a baby grand piano. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful." "The piano was your mother's," Richard said quietly. "I had it moved up here last week." Sarah touched the polished wood reverently. "You kept it in tune." "Ed." "Every month, for 10 years. The moment shattered as Catherine appeared in the doorway. "Richard," Jenkins called. "He has proof of my involvement in Sarah's disappearance. His man. He's threatening to go public unless you step down voluntarily." Emily sat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. "What does that mean?" "It means," Sarah said coldly, "that your aunt's past mistakes are finally catching up to her." "Sarah," Catherine pleaded, "if this gets out, it won't just hurt me. The scandal could affect hospital funding, the foundation's work, Emily's future." "You should have thought of that before you played God with our lives." Emily suddenly pressed a key, the note cutting through the tension. Then another. The beginning of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the room. "Please don't fight," she said quietly, continuing to play. "I just want us to be a family." Review. Richard watched his daughter's fingers move across the keys. Sarah's talent, his determination. She was the best of both of them, somehow surviving and thriving despite everything. "The board meets tomorrow," Catherine said softly. "Jenkins has the votes. We're out of time." Richard looked at his sister, then at his wife and daughter. 10 years ago, he'd chosen the company. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. "Let them vote," he said finally. "Some things are more important than power." The morning of the board vote dawned cold and gray. Richard adjusted his tie in the mirror, watching Sarah's reflection as she helped Emily prepare for her first day at her new private school. Their daughter wore her uniform like armor, chin held high despite her nervousness. "Remember, sweetheart," Sarah smoothed Emily's hair, "if you feel tired or your chest hurts."
Call the nurse right away, Emily finished. I know, Mom. The doorbell rang, echoing through the mansion. Catherine stood outside, clutching a thick folder. Her usual corporate polish couldn't hide her exhaustion. Jenkins leaked everything to the press, she said without preamble. My involvement, the hospital records, all of it. It's everywhere. Sarah's hand flew to the TV remote. Every channel showed their story. Old photos of Sarah and Richard's wedding, surveillance shots from homeless shelters, Emily's school records, hospital documents with Catherine's signature. In a shocking development, one reporter announced, sources reveal that Richard Thompson actively concealed her sister-in-law's whereabouts for 10 years, allegedly to protect Thompson Enterprises' public image during its crucial IPO period. Emily wrapped her arms around her mother's waist as photos of their shelter life flashed across the screen. Mom, everyone will know. Change the channel, Richard ordered, but it was the same everywhere. Their private pain had become public spectacle. Wait, Sarah suddenly leaned forward. Go back. A previous channel showed a woman speaking through tears.
Sarah Thompson saved my life. At the shelter, when I was considering giving up,
she talked me through my postpartum depression, helped me get help. My daughter and I are alive because of her. More stories emerged. Women from shelters across the city, sharing how Sarah had helped them, supported them, saved them. The narrative was shifting. This wasn't supposed to be part of the story, Catherine whispered. Because it didn't fit your scandal? Sarah's voice was sharp. Before Catherine could respond, Emily's new school called. Someone had leaked her enrollment. Reporters were gathering outside.
I can't go, Emily said quietly.
They'll all stare. They'll know we were homeless. Richard knelt before his daughter. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You survived. You stayed in school. You kept your music. You're the strongest person I know. Sarah touched the piano keys gently. Play for them, sweetheart. Like we did in the shelters. Music speaks louder than gossip. Emily squared her shoulders and nodded. An hour later, she walked into her new school, past whispering students and hovering reporters. When she reached the music room, she sat at the piano and began to play. The whispers stopped. By afternoon, videos of Emily's impromptu concert had gone viral. Homeless prodigy finds way home. The headlines changed. Music survives streets.
But in the Thompson Enterprises boardroom, Jenkins was unmoved.
The company cannot survive this scandal. Richard Thompson's actions, however well-intentioned, constitute a massive breach of trust.
Richard stood, facing the board.
My sister made terrible mistakes. But she's not the only one. 10 years ago, I chose this company over my family. I ignored my wife's depression, missed my daughter's birth, buried myself in wealth while they struggled to survive.
He placed his resignation letter on the table.
I won't make that choice again. Catherine rose shakily. If my brother goes, I go too. But first, you should know, I've been transferring my shares to a foundation in wealth for maternal mental health and homeless families. Jenkins sputtered. You can't. Actually, Sarah's voice came from the doorway. Aries. Emily stood beside her, still in her school uniform. She can. And combined with Emily's trust shares, we now control 40% of the company. Jenkins' face purpled. Aries. This is ridiculous. A homeless woman and a child can't. Emily stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. My mother helped hundreds of women while living on the streets, each ways. She kept me in school, found me pianos to practice on, made sure I took my heart medication even when she had to skip meals. She turned to the board. I may be just a kid, but I know what really matters. Do you? The annual Thompson Enterprises Charity Gala transformed the Plaza Hotel's ballroom into a glittering fantasy of crystal and silk. Emily stood at the edge of the crowd in her new blue dress, watching New York's elite mingle and gossip. She could feel their glances, hear their whispered comments. That's her, the homeless girl. Can you imagine living in shelters? I heard her mother was mentally ill. Sarah adjusted Emily's cardigan, carefully hiding the surgical scar. We don't have to stay, sweetheart. Your father will understand. But Emily straightened her shoulders. I want to play, Mom, like we planned. Richard appeared beside them, handsome in his tuxedo but tension evident in his jaw. Jenkins is here. With reporters. Of course he is, Sarah murmured. He won't stop until he destroys us all. Across the room, Catherine was arguing quietly with Jenkins, her evening gown sparkling under the chandeliers. The weeks since the board meeting had taken their toll. She looked exhausted, her usual corporate polish cracking. Emily moved toward the grand piano, centered on the small stage. But a group of young girls blocked her path. She recognized them from school. "My mom says you're just after Mr. Thompson's money," one girl sneered. "That you and your crazy mother planned this whole thing." Emily's hands began to shake. Her chest tightened. Not her heart condition, but pure panic. The room seemed to spin with hostile faces and judgmental whispers. She ran. "Emily!" Sarah's cry cut through the murmuring crowd. But Emily was already gone, disappearing through the service entrance.
Richard grabbed his coat.
"I'll take the car." "No," Sarah interrupted. "I know where she is." Catherine stepped forward. "Let me help. I have drivers, security teams." "Haven't you done enough?" Sarah snapped, but then stopped, seeing real pain in Catherine's eyes.
"Please," Catherine whispered. "Let me try to make something right."
Rain had started to fall as they split up to search.
Richard took the car uptown. Catherine's security team spread through Midtown,
while Sarah and Catherine headed downtown on foot. "She'll go somewhere with a piano," Sarah said as they hurried through the wet streets. "Somewhere she feels safe." Catherine's designer heels clicked on the sidewalk. Sarah exclaims. "I thought I was protecting everyone." "By lying? By keeping a father from his child?" "I watched you both," Catherine admitted quietly. "Every week, made sure you had enough to eat, that Emily had her medicine. I knew Richard would choose the company. He always did. I thought I was being kind." Sarah stopped suddenly. "Listen." Through the rain came the faint sound of piano music, Moonlight Sonata, drifting from St. Patrick's Church. I found Emily at the old upright piano, still in her blue dress, playing through her tears. The same piano where Richard had found them weeks ago. "I don't belong in their world," Emily whispered as they approached. "We don't belong." "No, sweetheart," Richard's voice came from the doorway. He'd figured it out too. "I don't belong in yours." He moved to the piano, sitting beside his daughter. "Play it again. I'll accompany you." Emily's hands stilled. "You play?" "I used to, every night with your mother, before I forgot what mattered."
Catherine stepped forward, rain dripping from her ruined evening gown. "Emily, I'm so sorry. For everything." "Ever him." Emily looked at her aunt. Really looked at her. For the first time. "Did you really make sure we had food? Medicine?" "It wasn't enough." Catherine's voice broke. "Yes. It wasn't nearly enough." Sarah watched her daughter process this, saw the same compassion that had helped so many shelter women surface in her young face. "Play with us," Emily said finally. "Mom too. Like a real family." And there, in the empty church at midnight, 4 broken people began to heal, their music rising above the rain, above the scandal, above a decade of pain and mistakes. The for sale sign outside Thompson Mansion drew media attention, but not as much as the announcement that followed. Richard Thompson was selling everything: the house, his art collection, his fleet of luxury cars. The proceeds would establish the Thompson Family Foundation, dedicated to maternal mental health and homeless family support. "My wife helped hundreds of women while living on the streets," Richard told reporters gathered outside their new, modest Upper West Side home. "It's time we turn that individual kindness into systemic change." Sarah stood beside him, looking more confident than she had in years. The proper medication and therapy had brought back her old spark. "Every shelter needs a piano," she added, making the crowd chuckle. "Music heals." Emily thrived in their new home, especially in her converted basement music studio. The space hosted free lessons for shelter kids 3 times a week. Today she was teaching a 6-year-old boy who reminded her of herself a year ago. "That's it, Tommy," she encouraged as he picked out a simple melody. "Just like we practiced." Catherine appeared at the top of the stairs, carrying sheet music. Gone were the power suits and stilettos, replaced by casual businesswear. The foundation's offices had a strict, no corporate armor policy. "The first shelter renovation is complete," she announced. "Full medical clinic, mental health services, and—" "A music room?" Emily asked eagerly. 2, actually. "And an art studio." Sarah looked up from the grant proposal she was reviewing. "Jenkins is still fighting us on the hospital wing funding." "Not anymore," Catherine smiled. "Of Dav. The board voted him out this morning. Turns out our homeless family initiative generated more positive press than his entire PR team. The doorbell rang. Dr. Chen from Mount Sinai, arriving for their weekly foundation meeting. His psychiatric ward's new maternal care program was already showing promising results. "We had another success story today," she reported, accepting a cup of tea. Young mother, severe postpartum depression. She heard Emily playing during her intake. Said if a homeless girl could keep her music, she could keep her hope. Emily's hands stilled on the piano keys. "Can I visit her? Like Mom used to visit the shelter moms." Sarah touched her daughter's shoulder. "You already are helping, sweetheart. Your music tells them they're not alone." Richard entered from his home office, his laptop open to a video call. "The Seattle shelter wants to replicate our program. They're asking about funding for musical instruments." "Done," Catherine said immediately.
I'll handle the logistics.
The transformation wasn't just in their work. It showed in small moments. Family dinners where phones were banned. Weekend trips in their modest SUV. Movie nights where they all squeezed onto one couch. "I don't miss it," Richard said one evening, watching Emily teach Sarah a new piece. "Any of it." Catherine, reviewing budgets at the kitchen table, looked up. The money? The power? The emptiness. The foundation grew faster than anyone expected. Sarah's first-hand experience combined with Richard's business acumen proved unstoppable. Catherine's networking skills, once used to climb corporate ladders, now built bridges between wealthy donors and struggling families. Emily's school performances became fundraising events, her story inspiring others to give. But it was her weekly shelter concerts that meant the most, watching scared children find courage through music, just as she had. "We should expand the music program," she suggested during a family dinner. "Maybe a scholarship fund?" "Already in progress," Catherine smiled. "The Emily Thompson Musical Education Fund launches next month." Emily blushed. "That's not... I didn't mean..." "Sweetheart," Sarah squeezed her hand. "Your name means something now. It means hope." Richard watched his family, whole, healthy, purposeful, and marveled at how losing everything had given him everything that mattered. The phone rang. Another shelter needed help. Another family needed hope. Another piano needed a home. They all smiled. This was their music now. 1 year after the gala night at the plaza, the Thompson Family Foundation had transformed 12 shelters across New York City. Each one now featured a fully equipped music room, medical clinic, and mental health services. But it was the 13th location that meant the most. The newly renovated wing at Mount Sinai Hospital, where Sarah had once been a patient. "I never thought I'd come back here voluntarily," Sarah admitted, standing in what used to be her old room. Now it was a warm, welcoming space, with soft colors and a baby grand piano. "It's so different." Emily ran her fingers along the piano keys. "Good different, healing different." Sarah smiled, watching a young mother rock her newborn in the corner while another played soft lullabies on the piano. The wing had become a sanctuary for mothers battling postpartum depression. Sarah led weekly support groups, her story giving hope to women fighting the same darkness she had faced. "Mrs. Thompson?" A nurse appeared at the door. "Thou." "The documentary crew is ready." PBS was filming a special on maternal mental health, featuring the foundation's work. Sarah had initially refused to participate, but Emily convinced her. "Your story matters, Mom," she had said. "Like my music." The filming captured intimate moments. Sarah counseling new mothers, Emily teaching piano to their children, Richard and Catherine working together to expand the program nationwide. "What made you choose music as a healing tool?" the interviewer asked Emily. Emily thought carefully before answering. "When we were homeless, music was the one thing nobody could take away. Mom always found me pianos, in churches, community centers, store windows. Even when we had nothing else, we had music." Later that day, Sarah received news that stunned her. After months of proper medication and therapy, her doctor cleared her to try for another child. "Are you sure?" she asked, gripping Richard's hand as they left the appointment. "Your depression is well managed," the doctor assured her. "And now you have support systems in place. You're not alone anymore." That evening, during family dinner, they shared the news. "A baby?" Emily's eyes widened. "I'd be a big sister?" Catherine wiped away tears. "I'd do everything differently this time," she promised. "Be the aunt I should have been before." The foundation's work continued to expand. Sarah's support group model was being adopted by hospitals nationwide. Emily's music program had awarded its first round of scholarships to homeless children showing musical promise. Richard, who once measured success in billion-dollar deals, now counted it in restored families and healing hearts. The corporate world had branded him a failure for walking away, but watching his wife and daughter thrive, he knew he'd finally succeeded at what mattered most. The foundation just received major funding, Catherine announced one morning. We can open 10 new locations next year. But it was a smaller victory that brought them the most joy. Tommy, Emily's first piano student from the shelter, had been adopted by a loving family. At his farewell concert, he played the piece Emily had taught him, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. "Music connects us," Emily told the gathered families. "Even when everything else falls apart, it brings us home." Sarah's hand drifted to her stomach, where new life was just beginning to grow.
A second chance, like the one they'd given so many others. "We've come full circle," Richard said softly, watching Emily teach another child at the piano. Sarah leaned against him. "No, we've grown beyond the circle. We're building something new."
Their family's healing had sparked a movement, touching lives far beyond what they'd imagined, and in the heart of it all was music, the same force that had kept hope alive during those long years on the streets. Carnegie Hall buzzed with anticipation. Tonight's benefit concert for the Thompson Family Foundation had sold out in hours. Not just because of the cause, but because of the performers. Emily Thompson, now 11, would make her debut alongside her father, playing an original composition dedicated to their family's journey. Backstage, Richard adjusted his bow tie nervously. It had been decades since he'd performed publicly. Sarah approached, radiant in a midnight blue gown that elegantly displayed her 5-month pregnancy. "The baby's kicking," she smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "Now, I think someone's excited for the performance." Emily paced in her white concert dress, sheet music clutched to her chest. The piece she'd composed, Symphony of Second Chances, told their story through music, from separation to reunion, from streets to salvation. "But if I mess up," she whispered, "everyone's out there." "Everyone who loves you is out there," Catherine corrected, appearing with a small velvet box, "including all your students from the shelters. And I have something for good luck." Inside the box lay a delicate silver bracelet with musical notes. Others. "I bought this the day you were born," Catherine admitted. "Kept it all these years, hoping." Emily hugged her aunt tight, their past hurts finally healed. Sarah watched them with tears in her eyes, remembering how far they'd all come. The stage manager appeared. 5 minutes. Richard took Emily's hand, around her smile. "Ready to show them what Thompsons are really made of?" The concert hall fell silent, as father and daughter took their places at twin grand pianos. Now, Emily's original composition began softly, like rain on Madison Avenue. Richard joined in, their melodies weaving together, telling their story without words. Now, in the front row, Sarah pressed Catherine's hand as the music swelled. They could hear everything in it. Lonely nights in shelters, Emily practicing on out-of-tune pianos, the moment of reunion at St. Patrick's, the healing power of forgiveness. The piece built to its climax, both pianists playing with passionate intensity. In those moments, watching her family create something beautiful from their pain, Sarah felt her baby kick in rhythm with the music. The final notes faded into profound silence, then thunderous applause erupted. Emily and Richard stood, holding hands, as roses showered the stage. But it was the sight of their shelter students cheering wildly that brought tears to Emily's eyes. Backstage after the performance, surrounded by flowers and well-wishers, Emily made an announcement that stunned them all. "I want to open a music school," she declared, "for kids. For homeless kids, foster kids, any kids who need music like I did. We can call it Second Chances Academy." Sarah pulled her daughter close. "I think that's perfect, sweetheart." "Already working on it," Catherine smiled. "The foundation just acquired the perfect building, right next to St. Patrick's Church." Richard watched his family, Sarah glowing with new life, Emily radiant with purpose, Catherine finally at peace with her past, and felt complete. The baby kicked through the whole performance, Sarah told Emily. "I think we have another musician on the way." Emily placed her hand on her mother's belly. "Hey little one, I'll teach you everything I know. About music, about survival, about forgiveness." The night ended with an impromptu performance in the nearly empty hall. Lullamus. Emily playing lullabies for her unborn sibling while Sarah hummed along. Richard and Catherine sitting close, their shadows stretching long across the stage. They had become more than a family restored. They were a symphony of second chances, playing healing music for a broken world. 6 months after the Carnegie Hall concert, Emily stood in the newly renovated ward of Mount Sinai Hospital, her baby brother sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside her as she taught piano to a group of children whose mothers were receiving treatment. Baby Thomas, named after the first student she'd taught in their basement studio, was barely 2 weeks old but already seemed to respond to music. "Music is like magic," she told her students, mostly children of mothers battling postpartum depression. "It helped my mom when she was sick, helped me when we were homeless, and now it's helping you." Sarah watched from the doorway, fully recovered from Thomas's birth, thanks to proper medical care and support. Everything she hadn't had the first time. The ward, now named the Thompson Family Center for Maternal Mental Health, had already helped hundreds of women avoid the path she'd been forced to take. "Your daughter is remarkable," Dr. Chen said, joining Sarah. "She has your strength, and Richard's determination, and Catherine's organizational skills." Sarah smiled, watching her former sister-in-law turned friend directing renovation crews at the other end of the hall. The foundation was expanding again, adding a new wing for music therapy. Richard appeared with coffee for everyone, no longer the corporate titan, but something far better. A present father, devoted husband, and passionate advocate for mental health awareness. "The Second Chances Academy opens next week," he announced. "Full enrollment, with a waiting list. Turns out a lot of kids need what Emily found in music." The academy, housed in a beautifully restored building next to St. Patrick's Church, would provide free music education to children from shelters, foster homes, and low-income families. Emily had helped design the curriculum herself, insisting on plenty of practice rooms and a policy that no child would ever be turned away. "Remember when we used to sneak into churches just to find a piano?" Emily asked her mother, gently rocking Thomas's bassinet. "Now we're building places where kids like me can play whenever they need to." Catherine joined them, reviewing blueprints for the academy's next phase. "The auditorium construction starts Monday. We'll have space for proper concerts by Christmas." "Speaking of concerts," Richard smiled, "I believe we have one to prepare for." The annual benefit concert had become a tradition, but this year was special. They would perform at St. Patrick's Church, where their reunion had begun. Emily had composed a new piece titled "The Symphony of Full Circles" to mark the occasion. That evening, the church filled with families from shelters, patients from the hospital, students from the academy, and supporters of the foundation. But the most important audience members sat in the front row, mothers and children who had found hope through the Thompson family's story. Emily took her place at the piano, now permanently installed in the church. Richard sat beside her, Sarah stood ready to sing, and Catherine prepared to conduct the student orchestra they'd assembled from academy pupils. Before beginning, Emily addressed the crowd. "2 years ago, I sat at this piano, homeless and scared. My mom was sick, we were hungry, but we had music. Today, we have so much more. Not just a home or a family, but a purpose." The music began softly, like raindrops on Madison Avenue. As it built, each note carried a message of hope, each chord a promise of redemption. Sarah's voice joined in, singing a lullaby she'd composed for Thomas, while the student orchestra added layers of harmony. In the candlelit church, surrounded by the people they'd helped and those who'd helped them, the Thompsons played their story of loss, love, and renewal. Baby Thomas slept peacefully through it all, tiny fingers moving in his sleep as if conducting. The final notes faded into profound silence, then erupted into joyful applause. But it was the sight of mothers hugging their children, of families healing together, that brought tears to their eyes. They had come full circle, and in doing so, had drawn a larger circle of hope around countless others. Their music had become a symphony of second chances, playing on through generations of healing hearts. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Richard's place? Have you ever experienced the healing power of music in your own life? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more touching stories of love, redemption, and second chances. Remember, sometimes we need to lose everything to find what truly matters.